Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something absolutely fascinating and honestly, a little bit chilling. We are going to figure out exactly how notorious criminals actually manage to vanish for decades and why, despite their absolute best efforts, they are almost inevitably caught. We're going to break down the mechanics of the escape, the bizarre psychology of hiding in plain sight, and the modern tripwires that finally bring these long-term fugitives to justice.
Okay, let's start with a number, 56. That's not just a random statistic. That is the staggering number of years a convicted manslaughterer named Frank Freshwaters spent on the run. So after fatally striking a pedestrian and violating his probation, he was sent to prison in 1959. But shortly after, he just walked away from an Ohio honor camp. And except for one botched arrest in 1975, Freshwaters successfully lived as a total ghost for over 5 decades.
Hearing a number like 56 kind of forces us to ask the big question for today, right? How do you completely erase your identity for half a century? I mean, what does it actually take to wake up every single morning, year after year, knowing you are actively being hunted by the government and still manage to blend in seamlessly with the rest of society?
Let's get into part 1, anatomy of an escape. Every decades-long evasion has to start with the initial breakout. Take John List, for example. Outwardly, totally normal Sunday school teacher, but his timeline is chillingly methodical. In the days leading up to November 9th, 1971, he calmly canceled his family's newspaper, milk, and mail deliveries. He then murdered his entire family, carefully laid out their bodies, and even called his children's schools with a fake sick excuse. By the time authorities finally arrived, List was long gone, vanishing into an 18-year evasion. Now, contrast that kind of cold, calculated planning with the sheer, impulsive actions of Susan Lefevre. Facing a super harsh 20-year sentence for heroin trafficking when she was just 19, she simply decided to leave. In 1976, she walked across an open prison yard, threw her jacket over a barbed wire fence, and ran to a waiting car. Her relative was inside, literally praying the rosary. It was spontaneous, it was chaotic, but it bought her 32 years of freedom. Or, consider the sheer audacity of Richard Lee McNair. This guy didn't jump a fence or orchestrate some complex alibi. He literally mailed himself out of a penitentiary in a cardboard box. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood script, right? But this incredible act of deception actually worked, allowing him to bypass security completely and start his life on the run. Moving on to part 2, hiding in plain sight. Because once they're actually free, things get really weird. Once the adrenaline wears off, a bizarre duality begins. To mask their horrific pasts, these fugitives don't hide in caves. They build mundane lives and hide right next door to us. Susan Lefevre is the perfect example here. The escaped heroin trafficker completely transformed into Marie Walsh. For 32 years, she lived in a wealthy California suburb, drove a Lexus SUV, and raised 3 kids. She used the social security number of a woman who had died in 1981 and hid her entire past from her husband of 23 years. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was literally hiding in the PTA. It's a very common theme. Violent criminals often survive by adopting incredibly boring aliases. James Lawhead Jr., wanted for a cold case murder, vanished into Arizona as Vincent Reynolds. Meanwhile, our 56-year fugitive, Frank Freshwaters, became William Harold Cox. He was just a retired trucker living in a weathered Florida trailer drawing Social Security. Their ultimate survival tactic is simply to become entirely uninteresting. Which brings us to part 3, the catalysts for capture. No matter how perfectly buried a past is, the truth usually finds a way out. You know, these decades-old runs almost never end in some dramatic foot chase. It really boils down to 4 main tripwires: massive scientific leaps in DNA or facial recognition, huge media exposure, anonymous public tips, or sometimes just incredibly careless administrative blunders by the fugitives themselves. Technology and the media are just relentless hunters. It took 34 years, but advanced DNA testing and facial recognition software finally matched James Lawhead Jr. to his fake identity. John List, on the other hand, was brought down by television. After living 18 years as Robert Clark, a 1989 segment on America's Most Wanted triggered a viewer tip, and just like that, his freedom ended instantly. Public tips are also absolutely vital.
especially for securing justice for tragic victims like 17-year-old Sarah Said and her sister Amina. Back in 2008, their father, Yasser Said, fatally shot them in his taxi, which prompted a truly horrific 911 call from Sarah. He managed to evade the FBI for 12 years, hidden by family members down in Texas. But relentless surveillance and a crucial tip from a maintenance worker finally brought his run to an end.
But sometimes it's just pure, unbelievable human error. Take the astonishing case of Lo Kong. He was a convicted murderer and rapist who escaped a Macau prison in 1967. He spent nearly 2 decades successfully off the grid. So how was he caught? Well, in 1985, he inexplicably walked right into a government office and applied for a Hong Kong identity card. One single administrative blunder blew 20 years of cover. And these little slip-ups usually lead to surprisingly quiet surrenders. Remember Frank Freshwaters from the beginning? After 56 years, U.S. Marshals finally tracked him to Florida, but they needed hard proof. So they used a clever ruse to check his fingerprints. Then they handed the 79-year-old his own 1959 mugshot and asked, "Have you seen this man?" Faced with his past, he just gave up. He looked at them and simply said, "You got me." This leads us to our final section, Part 4, Time Cannot Erase Crime. I think Placer County District Attorney Morgan Gier really hit the nail on the head after James Lawhead Jr. was arrested for a 34-year-old murder. He said just because of the passage of time doesn't mean justice diminishes in importance. And it's so true. The passage of time doesn't erase responsibility, and it definitely doesn't diminish law enforcement's commitment. Because for the families left behind, cold cases are never forgotten cases. When you actually look at the stolen time these people enjoyed, the scale is just staggering. From Frank Freshwater's unbelievable 56 years, to mob boss Whitey Bulger's 16-year run, down to Yasser Said's 12 years. These numbers aren't just stats. They represent entire lives lived under false pretenses, families utterly deceived, and justice delayed. But, as we've seen, the truth inevitably caught up with every single one of them. So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. We've seen people literally mail themselves out of prison, adopt entirely new personas, and evade the authorities for over half a century. But knowing what we know now about the evolution of DNA, digital footprints, and just the sheer inevitability of human error, no matter how perfect the alias is or how many decades pass, is capture always just a matter of time? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.